see marriage as a sacrament. And I think there was some degree that that's why we got married, because we were excited to receive this and to sort of be iron sharpening iron and help each other in our walk with Christ. And so we had that view, but let me think here. About a year after we got married it was, we moved down to Texas to do my master's degree in philosophy at Texas A&M. And it was here that we, for the first time, encountered, I guess, Catholics who were practicing and very serious about their faith. Up to this point, I had all these thoughts, but I hadn't really met too many Catholics who were really serious about their faith. I had some kind of friends and acquaintances in high school who were Catholics, but they weren't terribly serious about it, and that was another kind of a put off, I guess, of Catholicism to me, was that, didn't seem like, from my experience, they were that serious about their faith. And so when we moved to Texas, I really experienced Catholics who were serious about their faith for the first time, and it was in the philosophy department. And I had a professor who's passed away now, Hugh McCann, who was a Catholic professor, and I had a few of my peers who were Catholic philosophers, and we would talk about faith. And I remember talking to one of them one afternoon and talking about my Wesleyan heritage and how important sanctification was, the call to holiness, that we were to become holy like Christ is, and that this was very important to my faith tradition. And he looked at me like, of course this is important. This is a very special thing, and also it's completely unsurprising. That's what the Catholic Church has taught since the beginning. And I'm like, huh, really? I had no idea. He was saying all of these things that sounded so Wesleyan, or maybe I was saying all these things that sounded so Catholic, I'm not sure. And I began to think, well, maybe there isn't that much of a distance between where I am and where the Catholic Church is. And we attended the Catholic Church for about 6 months or so. We weren't really ready to convert, but that was a good experience for us. And then we found a different church that we were like, well, we're not ready to become Catholic. We don't want to tick off our families, so we should find some Protestant church that we're comfortable with. And so we did that. And then we moved up to New York after 2 years, and where I did my PhD. And had to go through the whole process of finding a church again. And by this point in our marriage, finding a church had become taxing, because where are you going to find a church whenever you're this Protestant who believes in the real presence, who believes in all these sacraments, but doesn't really believe in the authority of the church, the papacy, that kind of. You're like in this tiny percentage of Protestantism at this point. So we kind of hated going and finding churches. But one significant development during our time in New York was we had the birth of our first daughter, Miriam. And early in our marriage, this ties in with what I was saying about viewing marriage as a sacrament. Early in our marriage, we had to, of course, settle the issue of sorry, I'm drawing a blank here. The contraception. And I was frankly uncomfortable with contraception. I didn't really know why. And we thought through this, and we thought, well, it's not good to bring children into the world when you're not prepared. And it's it's also good for a husband and a wife to be together. And so we kind of decided we were okay with it. And frankly, that's common thinking these days in Protestant circles. One thing that I'd become uncomfortable with, though, was the fact that I'd become aware that historically that's not what the church had taught. Protestantism or Catholicism. And I began to think, well, man, for 2,000 years, Christianity has taught this one way, and now here in 2010, we think we know better. And that didn't sit quite right with me, that all of those people are wrong. But I hadn't quite figured out how to think about it, and so I decided to just shut up about it. And after the birth of our first child, this became important again. And I just became convicted that we ought not be using contraception. Sorry if you didn't want to hear about this. But it's an important thing, and so that's why I raised it. And we had our largest, probably one of our largest fights as a married couple over this issue, where after Miriam was born, I decided that I was not okay with this, and I read some philosophical arguments that made me even more convinced that this was not the way we should go. And Bethany was very, very unhappy with me. Very, very unhappy. And for 2 weeks we kind of fought, and then we didn't really talk much at all. And then after 2 weeks, she came to me and she said, all right, if we're going to do this, I suppose we're going to have to figure out how to do natural family planning. And I was like, well, you just changed your mind like that? And so a couple months later, we found ourselves now enrolled in a natural family planning class, the only Protestants, of course. We ended up changing our position on this, and for a couple reasons. You know, when I started reading philosophical arguments about this, I read this book, this great book, and if anyone's interested in this issue, I could point you to it, by a guy named Alexander Pruss. Teaches at Baylor University. As it turns out, little secret, Baylor University is a Baptist school, but almost the philosophy department, all the philosophers there, are almost entirely Catholics, in a funny twist of fate. But this particular philosopher had written a book about love and sexuality, and he came to think of it, or he came to express the sexual union in this way, that it is union, right? And that's what it's directed toward, genuine union. And some people will talk about this as, well, it's for the purpose of creating children. And I don't think that's wrong, but I kind of like this union talk better. And the reason is I think it reflects the theological nature of it all better. If you think about, what are we headed toward? Hopefully we're headed toward union with Christ. That's the ultimate culmination of this. Whenever we die, whenever we've been sanctified, we become united with Christ. And so, in this very intimate relationship, there's a reflection of that, this divine reality, I think. And so he came to think about it in these, or express what the marital act is. It's union. And what's wrong with contraception is that it blocks that union. Either at a chemical level, or you're putting up a barrier of some kind, it blocks that union. And now, there's a couple things that I like like I said, I like talking about it as a union more than I like talking about it as directed toward childbearing, although I think that is right. And that is that you'll often hear Protestants or non-Christians object, and they'll say, well, what about all the couples that can't conceive? You know, how do you make sense of that? But whenever you talk about it as union, that's kind of irrelevant, you know? another objection that I often hear is that, well, put it this way. If contraception is wrong because it prohibits child conception, then NFP is wrong too. Natural family planning is wrong too. Why? Because you're trying to avoid conception. Or at least sometimes it's used for that purpose. This is a little bit of a mistake though, I think. Here's the difference. Whenever you practice natural family planning, you're not actively trying to avoid conception. Whereas whenever you take contraception, you are actively trying to avoid conception. So there's a difference in the nature of the act, it seems to me. So the second thing, we're not really called to we're not mandated to conceive children or something like that. It's not like we have to be doing that. And so it seems like with natural family planning, if a couple's choosing not to have a child, what's going on there? What's going on is it's more of a passive thing. You're not taking this act that is meant to prevent conception from occurring. So I don't think that's a good objection. Maybe you've heard that. I shared those with you before because I think these are, whenever these issues come up, whenever you're talking to people who are skeptical of what the church teaches on these things.